Again, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to talk to you a little bit about the next step in human space flight, commercial crew program. So I'd like to start off a little bit talking about Charles Lindbergh. In 1927, he flew across the Atlantic. And he did it not because there was an award or anything, he did it because he wanted to. He did it because there was a challenge. And soon thereafter, companies followed. They started transporting stuff. Soon thereafter, they started transporting people. And now we have transatlantic flights on a regular basis. So what he did sparked folks' curiosity about what they could do to build on that. So I'd like to think about that a little bit as we start with commercial crew and what we might be able to achieve from there. Right now, we have no way to get to our space station. And we have two phases of pretty much human spaceflight to space. One is to low Earth orbit and space station, which is the commercial crew program. The other is the exploration program, and that is the Space Launch System, which is going to be a 70 metric ton rocket. And that's going to be evolvable to a 130 metric ton rocket. That will be breaking windows in Titusville once again. And the SLS will be launching Orion, which is a deep space capsule. So most of you are very familiar with what our capsules have done previously. Our deep space capsule has got more redundancy. It has more nines behind the reliability than what you need for low Earth orbit. So it costs more and it takes more. It also has more commodities for the astronauts because they have longer requirements to stay out in space. In addition to the radiation hardening for the electronics and the radiation shielding for the astronauts. So that's the hard stuff. Getting out to L2, getting out to an asteroid or the moon. That's exploration. Commercial crew is about getting to the International Space Station in low Earth orbit from American soil. So I always like to remind folks, we have an International Space Station, which is the size, it's larger than a football field. It's almost 1 million pounds, and it has 4 laboratories. The American laboratories, half of that has been designated a national lab. And that is now managed by CASIS, which is the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space. And it's based here in Florida. The national lab is something that was written into law, I think, in 2005. And the whole point of that is to allow researchers, academic researchers, pharmaceutical companies, even you can go write a proposal, get funded, and go fly an experiment on the space station. That's what CASIS does. And so what that is that brings the demand for space science. It increases the demand so folks can make money on orbit, and therefore if you have a supply with no demand, you soon fail. And we learned that in the late 90s with the EELV program. Some folks remember. So International Space Station is the size of a football field, almost 1 million pounds, and it's an incredible engineering achievement of international relations, and the scientific achievements are just coming out. It's authorized through 2020, but it could go through 2028. And we have only one way to get there, and we pay rubles to get there.
A lot of rubles?
It's a lot of rubles, and the prices went up depending on how you look at it. So right now, the space shuttle built and completed the space station. And we only have 4 cargo carriers. We have ATV, which is European. We have HTV, which is Japanese. We have Progress, which is Russian. And they pretty much take care of their own needs. We have Dragon, now flying off a Slick 40. And they are delivering cargo. And soon we'll have Cygnus. They just completed their test flight of their rocket with a mass simulator. And if I remember right, in August, because they got to change out an engine. September maybe, I don't know, whichever news organization, but let's just say in 2013, they will fly their test mission to the space station and then begin delivering cargo. And I think they're actually going to deliver some cargo on this next test mission. For people, we have Soyuz, and that's 3. And that flies from Kazakhstan. So I want to talk a little bit about history since I got a bunch of historians here. Where'd I go? Wait a minute. Where's my... There it is. Okay, never mind. Later in the slides. So the Commercial Crew Program is the next step in human spaceflight, and that's how we're going to get to the space station. And the way we set up the program is such that we don't have requirements 6 levels deep. We have performance-based requirements and safety requirements. And we tell the companies what we need, what we want, and let them figure out how they're going to deliver it. That way they can have a business model that makes sense for them, so they can also go out and get licensed by the FAA and go serve other markets that they choose to open. For instance, Boeing is partnered with Bigelow. Bigelow has just got a Space Act agreement with NASA, and he's going to test out a module on the space station. But in the future, if you're going to go fly science in space, maybe you don't want to mess with cases. Maybe your proposal didn't get funded. Or maybe you got your own money and you want to go fly it on Bob's station. So you go fly Bob's station if you can get investors and you want to make money doing it. So Commercial Crew started. We have 2 phases already done, and right now we're in the integrated capability phase. That's highlighted right there. So that's pretty much the public purpose, and we're moving towards certification. Actually, we have 1 contract now where we're talking about requirements, and I'll get to that later. But right now we're looking at integrated design. So CCDEV 1 and 2 were the first 2 phases, and we had, in 2010, $50 million awarded to 5 companies. So for those of you familiar with space, that's not a lot of money. That's like seed money. In 2011, we had $315 million, and actually I think it ended up at $325 million, and that was to 4 companies, and that was to look at spacecraft. We had 3 companies, unsolicited, unfunded, come say, hey, we'd like to work with you to work with our design so we can mature them. And we said, fine, we'll commit our NASA resources and do that. But that was unfunded, unsolicited. Right now, I mentioned integrated capability. We have 3 companies. On your left is the Boeing CST-100. That's going to fly in an Atlas V. In the middle is the Dream Chaser. That's Sierra Nevada Corporation. And that's based on an HL-20 wing vehicle design, again, on an Atlas V. Both those vehicles would fly from Slick 41. And then on your right is the Falcon 9 with the Dragon capsule. So what's interesting is the integrated design includes the spacecraft, the rocket, the ground systems and operations, and the on-orbit operations and systems. And we've only been looking at this since about July. So this is our first look, NASA's first look at the integrated design. But I wanted to talk a little bit about history, especially when we talk about spacecraft. In 1961, I was hoping Al Cruz would be here, but you know, bear with me, he'd be the expert. In 1961, just a few months after Alan Shepard flew his suborbital flight, Martin Company delivered drawings to the Air Force. These were preliminary integrated drawings for a space plane, and it was Dinosaur. And its heritage is right there, I just learned, so thank you. But the Dinosaur was to fly a crew to space, and it was on a Titan II. And that was really, really early. For the space shuttle, we had 5 companies competing their designs, and the requirements were very different. It was only when the Air Force got involved when we had to change our requirements, and we ended up with the hybrid space shuttle we have today, or had today until we got it retired. We had General Dynamics have their Triomese design. You had 2 flyback boosters with an orbiter, and these were designed to build and rendezvous with the space station. McDonnell Douglas had a 2-stage to orbit design. They had an HL-20 in the game. Martin Marietta, little company you may have heard of. They had a catamaran design. This was the coolest thing. All flyback boosters, by the way, piloted flyback boosters. But this was a catamaran design with only 2 pilots. Again, in 1969. And this one was unfunded, unsolicited. And the report they put together was that thick. I have a copy on my desk. Tremendous amount of work. Lockheed Missiles, again, 2-stage to orbit. Fairly detailed drawings. These are preliminary drawings. These had turbofans that would pop out so they could do a once around with the booster. North American Rockwell. This is the company that ended up building the orbiter. Looks very different from what we ended up with. Again, requirements changed. All these were designed to build and rendezvous with the space station. And competition was key. So that's kind of where we're at today. We have 3 companies competing to build a design to take our astronauts to a space station. We don't need to build it. The space shuttle already completed that mission. We just need the taxi, the news folks like to say. So again, I mentioned that we have 3 Space Act agreements with 3 companies for a total of about $500 million, about $1 billion, I think. And the basic premise here, we have 2 capsules, 1 winged vehicle, and 2 launch vehicles. So it's the most diversity we could squeeze out of that amount of money. Sierra Nevada, with their Dream Chaser winged vehicle, can carry up to 7 crew, and they're working on a non-toxic propellant. Most of the folks use N2O4 and hydrazine, which most of you are probably familiar with. Probably carried around the hydrazine in buckets, some of you. But they are using similar systems which are they're non-toxic, so you can land it anywhere and you wouldn't have to have escape operation. Or you wouldn't have to have escape operation and shut down all the other operations while you're fueling. So there's a lot of benefits for operations if you have a non-toxic propellant. That technology could go many, many different places. So that's very important. And they have a number of tests that they're doing and critical design reviews that they're performing with half their funding. And they still intend to get to a critical design at the end of the ICAP. They are, right now, they did a capture carry test, which you see in the center photo. And you would have seen had my video worked. But they actually have an engineering test article in which they're going to go do a glide test later this year. And that's somewhat similar to Enterprise, when we dropped Enterprise from the 747, except this one will be unmanned, will be unpiloted. They're going to pilot it remotely, and they're going to drop it from an Erickson crane helicopter. And they're going to glide it, fly it back and make sure they understand how it flies, all the actuators and systems perform the way they expect it to. In CCW2, they built the hybrid motor rocket there. And that's very similar motor rocket that they just tested with the Spaceship Two. Virgin Galactic just had their successful test firing. Oh, it was Sierra that built that. SpaceX, some of you probably have heard of them. They're launching here now. They're Dragon capsules designed to carry 7. They plan on-land landings. Right now their cargo capsule lands in the Pacific. So working that with the FAA could be a little tricky, but I've talked to the FAA. They said, hey, we're good guys, we'll do it. We'll see. But they actually have a couple big tests coming. In 2013, they're going to do a pad abort from Slick 40. So we're going to see smoke and fire in 2013. And then in 2014, they're going to do an in-flight abort. I don't know if they're going to do it at max Q, I would. But they're going to do an in-flight abort and make sure they understand how their system performs. That's one of the requirements that we have in the commercial crew program, is that we need to be able to get our astronauts through all phases of flight, get them back safely. So that's a little different from shuttle, where we had the slide pole. They got $440 million, and they have a number of milestones that they're marking off and working through. But the most important, the most exciting ones to me are the smoke and fire tests. You can see how they plan on cramming 7 people in their capsule, stadium seating of sorts. They test all their engines out in McGregor, Texas. They built their own test facility out there. And as I mentioned, they are delivering cargo to the space station today. The Boeing company is out here too. Again, they're going to fly from Slick 40 with Atlas 5. And they have old OPF-3, I guess they call it CC3PF, something like that.
C3PF.
C3PF, there you go. Cargo Crew Processing Facility? Something. Okay, see?
Commercial Cargo Crew Processing.
Nice. So NASA acronyms. We're going to have to make an edit on that. But in true Boeing fashion, they have 19 milestones. So they're very methodical, working through their design reviews, working through their tests. They just completed a Buffett wind tunnel test. And they're also working with ULA to work on the dual upper stage Centaur. And the Air Force is very keen on a dual Centaur. It's always been scarred for a dual Centaur, but never flown. So this will be good for the Air Force and good for NASA. They recently performed a drop test, parachute test. And you can see that they use airbags. The Soyuz Russians, they use little retro rockets, little solids that they fire. And Boeing's like, we don't need retro rockets, you just airbags. They're in your cars. And they work. The test was successful. The parachute test was successful. and they're marching. They've knocked down, I think, 7 milestones. Yeah, I'll have to check my facts, but it's close to that. I mentioned certification. So there's a lot of folks that say, well, what is a Space Act agreement? It's just other transactional authority. When we go fly our astronauts, we're doing it under a contract, just like we've always done. We'll have a COFA process, just like we did in shuttle, to make sure every system's ready and all our operations have been performed. We just won't go as many levels deep as we did with shuttle. A little bit of an eye chart, but I just wanted to show that we are working in the same time frame. We have integrated capability and they're maturing their designs. We're also working with them under a contract with alternate standards and to look at their specific designs. Phase 1 certification, where we're at right now, is we're looking at their alternate standards. There are 10 ways to skin a cat. They all want to do it differently, and that's fine, so long as it meets the intent of what our standards are. And so our engineers are off looking at that. Hazard analysis and reports. They have different designs. They have different operations. What are your hazards? How will you mitigate them? That's what those are. Verification and validation plans. Most of you know what that is. That is, how are you going to verify that your structure is good? How are you going to verify that when you put it together, all the electronics work? What is your test regime, and how will you validate that? Finally, what is your certification plan? And that's what they're delivering in 1 year's time to us. So we're working with them to make sure that all their products are ready. That way, when we go to phase 2, everything will basically minimize the work we need to do at that point. We want to understand what their alternate standards are early, before the designs are potted. Because changing the design later is expensive, and it costs us time. So I mentioned phase 2. Phase 2 is the one where we actually fly the astronauts to the space station. And we're going to award that in May of 2014. That is fast, fast, fast coming. Our teams are off working. The companies are off working. And I mentioned something. All these folks are designing 7 seats. NASA only needs 4. They can count. So why do they have 7 seats? It's because they intend to serve other markets. NASA's just one market. So we said, great. Pull out 3 seats, put in some cargo. So we have requirements in for them to fly cargo up and cargo back. And part of that certification plan is making sure everything gets done. And we do all the heavy lifting and get the COFA process done. And you can see the schedule there. So we're working this summer to get it out and award it in May of 2014.
1 year from today.
So that's really it. I look forward to your questions. Thank you for your attention. Yes, sir.
You're going to get it, the proposal is to get it done in 2014?
Well, we're going to award in May of 2014.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so the time frame they still have a number of certification tests they're going to have to run through. And the intent is to go fly in May of in late 2017. And so the space station is authorized through 2020, but based on the engineering design, based on how things are working, how parts are wearing out, it could go as long as 2028. Yes, sir.
Right now, as far as I know, SpaceX is the only one bringing stuff back from the ISS.
That's true. They're the only down mass capability until we start flying crews on our commercial crew provider.
That's the next time we're going to, okay.
Right, so I think I'm not sure, I have to double check the requirements, but I think we have a requirement for a couple of glacier units, which it's a fancy word for, it's a cold box, powered cold box. And so yeah, I mean, they got 7 seats, great. Pull those out, put in some glaciers, we're going to fly some more cargo down.
Works.
The scientists really, many of the scientists need to get their experiments back so they can compare what happened in space to what happened on the ground, therefore they can learn something. Yes, sir.
Hypothetically speaking, if one of the 3 candidates wants to put more of their money into it to speed up their certification process, would NASA have to say, look, we only have money to go at a certain pace and you're just going to have to wait? Or would NASA say, hey, if you guys are going to put the extra money in to be ready to be certified by 2015, we're going to work with you on that?
Our program manager is looking at every opportunity to move this launch date to the left.
Okay, so that's not ruled out. If they want to go faster and put their own money in?
I cannot imagine that we would turn away free testing or free design work.
Because I know Elon has said they want to be ready by 2015, but that's
So-
there's no money in.
So the difference between our schedule and what the commercial providers have said is that we have margin and we have experience.
Mhm.
And now if we can move it to the left, we will. If everything goes smashingly and there are no hangups and everything fits together perfect the first time and tests perfect the first time, sweet, we can make it.
Bezos and Musk, head to head, way to go.
You know, that's the benefit though of having the partners put their own money in too, is it really gives them extra incentive to be successful. So right now in the ICAP, a lot of all three companies are putting in their own money, got skin in the game. So that really is extra incentive, because if they don't make it the next phase, you know, they lose.
You mentioned Sierra Nevada has a drop test coming up later this year. Do you know what altitude that's going to be at?
I think the sky crane is limited to about 25,000 feet.
25?
Yeah.
And they're going to do a drop test from there?
Yep. Yeah, I don't think the helicopter can get it much
No.
over 30. It's going to be in the high 20s.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
The shuttle drop test was only for 42,000. That's not fast.
Yeah. You had a question in the back, sir?
Yeah, you didn't say much about the ground facilities, launch complex 40 modification for the two vehicles.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. ULA has hired Hensel Phillips out of Orlando to go take a look at their launch pad and figure out how to put humans on it and get humans off of it. So that would you would have you need access to the capsule or to the HL-20 design, the Dream Chaser, whoever wins, and you also need a way to get the crews off.
How about 40?
Same as Slick 40, but we don't know who they hired. But certainly, they're all going to need those same systems, right? You need to get the people in, get the people off. Using your launch escape system to get the people off is not really a good way to do it. The other thing I mentioned too is I forgot to mention is that all three companies are using pusher systems. So for a launch escape system, we always see the tractor, the big tower on top, and that pulled the capsule away. The companies are basically taking a look at what NASA did with their pusher system and putting that to work. If they can throttle it properly and they can make it work, then that becomes incredibly powerful to have that maneuvering capability on orbit. So you don't waste that space or that weight.
Couldn't you use that to bring it back to land?
If the FAA will allow you to.
Roger that.
Right, because if you use hypers, then you have potential for failure over populated areas. So, you know, there's places in California they could land.
Anywhere.
Yes, sir.
Why did the Russians just increase their cost to us for SEEK? I mean, they're holding us hostage.
They're good allies.
Well, the comrades understand capitalism. And, well, and actually, and in fairness to them, they actually combined two contracts to one. So I don't know if there was a cost increase or not. Because
There was a cost increase, went up to 71 million.
I understand, and what that is when you combine two contracts to one, there's going to be a cost increase because it wasn't accounted for in the previous the seats.
And this don't jack us up enough to get, like you were saying, to get us to move a little faster?
Hey, it makes me sick that we're paying rubles to get to our own space station. So it's not the best way to do it. They've been a really good partner. You know, we nearly decrewed in 2011. So having a single way to get there is, for many of your Air Force people, understand single access, guaranteed access to space is important.
Did we ever charge them for going up on a shuttle?
I believe we had agreements in place, and I don't think there was any money
I think it
exchanged.
was a one broke flip before on that.
Yes, Andy?
Would the May 2014 award date is, I will not ask if that's cast in brass, it probably isn't, but is it intended that that will be the final definition of a crewed vehicle?
So when we award in May of 2014, the Commercial Crew Program and NASA wants to keep competition in as long as we can. Now, with sequestration and all the other fun things going on, getting the money to keep competition will be incredibly difficult. So, that will be dependent upon congressional funding and authorization.
So that when I'm talking about the technical end of it.
The technical end of it, yeah,
that will be a package
that will certify the entire system to
Yeah.
carry NASA astronauts and our European partners, and we have the agreements with them to fly their astronauts, to carry our NASA astronauts and our European partners to the space station. That will be the design. So whether it's 1 or 1.5 or 2, if we can certify 2, then they compete services, right?
That was my next question.
No.
Are you going to follow the EELV practice of assured access to space with at least 2 contractors?
That's the intent. Whether we get the funding to do it or not will be
Oh, okay.
right. So, and you really do have assured access between having at least an American capability and a Russian capability
Yeah, true.
at a minimum, right? You have redundant, dissimilar redundant capability.
I saw an article online about a month ago that said that once we are operational, that there would always be one Russian on our commercial crew flights and always one American on the Soyuz flights to ensure that both agencies have a permanent presence at all times. Any truth to that?
I'm not aware
You're
of that.
not aware of that?
So that would be in the space station scheduling, right? And
Makes sense.
And the other thing I failed to mention too is the space station was designed for a crew of 7. And the commercial crew program has a requirement for 4 seats. So if you have a 4-seater up there and a 3-seater, then that means you can have 7 astronauts on orbit performing science and maintaining the space station. Don Pettit, who just came back to from space station a few months ago, testified before the Senate, and he was asked, what is the limiting factor to get science done on station? And his answer was crew time. They're busy taking care of the space station. Darn thing requires a little bit of maintenance. So crew time is a limiting factor. So adding 1 more astronaut to the space station will get that much more science out of it. And people are like, well, what science are they doing? There are a couple of vaccines in the works. Just as one example is a lot of bugs, when they go into microgravity, get really nasty. They get virulent. And we're able to look at the DNA markers and some of the protein folding and say, basically, the knob turned that way. Well, vaccine is the bug with the knob turned the other way, right? So you got a bacteria that can trigger an immune response but not make you sick. So if a bug gets really nasty in space and you can figure out why it got nasty, you can turn the knob back, or you can make it less virulent and therefore use it as a vaccine. So there's a salmonella vaccine of sorts, or a treatment in FDA pre-trials. Using that same model, a company, I think it's Astrogenetics out of Austin, has one in the works for MRSA. Now MRSA kills 5,000 to 10,000 people a year. It's that nasty, flesh-eating, disgusting stuff in hospitals that won't die. So imagine having a vaccine for MRSA from space station. Now you don't make the vaccine on orbit. You figure out what changes on orbit and you make the vaccine on Earth. So that's powerful. And for drug companies to cut out, a lot of the research that they do is called combinatorial chemistry. And it's just redundant, robotic, computerized chemistry, and they find trends, and then they got to go narrow it down. Well, if you have a mechanism in space, you can cut out all that research and get right to the point. So they could save a lot of R&D money and get good treatments for us on Earth. So space station is an incredibly powerful platform to get returns on Earth. And having an American way to get there is incredibly important to me. Any questions? Laura.
How much power do the Russians have to prevent our commercial crew partners from actually docking or rendezvous? I remember there was a lot of politics last year about SpaceX birthing.
That was a safety concern, right?
How much power do they have to prevent if they're concerned about safety?
About as much power as we have to prevent them. You know, it's an international space station, so we have agreements in place.
Quick question, I assume that when we're operational, that astronaut crew quarters at ONC would be where we would have those 4 astronauts based, and we'd be taking them over to 40 or 41 in some sort of a transport vehicle?
I have no idea.
We don't know yet.
Yeah, I have no idea. We're just looking at the integrated designs for the first time, so it's hard to know what they're, where are they going to train the astronauts? Don't know, right? Are they going to train them at JSC, or are they going to make a different facility? Are they going to use one of these commercial facilities? No idea.
The optional demonstration flight under Phase 2, do you think either A, you'll actually ask to do that, and or B, do you think you'll have the funding to do something like that?
The what?
There's an option in the CCI cap that came out last
optional
summer.
milestones.
Optional milestone, which says you can ask them to do a demonstration flight, but they have to provide their own astronauts, which I find is a interesting little twist.
So another way to think about that would be to have them lay out a schedule and cost, but a realistic one, not a sales pitch, because we may pull the trigger. So it has to have some reality in there, not salesmanship.
Yeah.
So what's the chances of that happening? I think General Bolden has stated that that's not a possibility.
I have this mental image of Garrett Reisman calling up 3 buddies and saying, you want to go for a flight?
Yeah, I don't see NASA flying even company crews to Leo under a Space Act agreement, where they have very, very little oversight on the safety requirements.
So it'd probably be a FAR agreement then?
In the FAR agreement, you have NASA astronauts,
Yeah.
Good
So it
luck.
probably won't happen then.
right? Because to fly our NASA astronauts, they're employees. We have to ensure their safety as much as we can and minimize the risk, and we do that with a FAR-based contract. Andy.
This is probably more for Space Florida, but on the CASAS, is CASAS going to be dealing with the suborbitals like ATK 46 or our little grasshopper off of 36?
Yeah, I don't know. I think CASE's primary goal is to manage the national lab portion of the space station.
That's what I thought.
Now, that's not to say that they couldn't,
Well, yeah.
with additional funding from the state or something else,
Yeah, because-
manage other programs.
Yeah, both companies are looking towards suborbital science
Right.
experiments.
So that may be a stepping stone, right? That may be something that, if they choose to do, and they are able to get support and funding to do,
True.
then you could do a stepping stone, right? Well, gee, I don't know if this experiment's worthy to fly on space station, but let's take a quick look and see how it does in 4 or 5 minutes of microgravity, or 6 or 10, whatever you get. So, this is just me talking, it could be. If I was cases, I would consider it. Yes, sir.
Are there any parallel efforts with the commercial program to make launching from the Cape a little bit easier than it is today? Because you're going to have commercial people trying to fly their vehicles on the same ones that we're trying to fly military.
Right. So I think the range.
It's hard at best right now.
Yeah, the range commander, so I talked to him just personally, and he feels like they deconflict and they are pretty flexible. They give days when they can. The company's viewpoint, if you read the papers, some are advocating other places to launch from. I don't know how all that plays out.
I think right now the law is such that we have to give priority to the national defense,
Yeah, right.
National interest rather than the commercials. And that's something they've been trying to change for about 5 years now.
Well, I know, but when these commercial companies get serious about flying, they're going to want to launch.
That's the reason for Shiloh, and that's
At
the
their
reason
schedule,
for
not-
Texas.
Right.
So that's the nature of deconflicting the range and deconflicting operations, right? So if, for instance, if KSC is going to be multi-user, deconflicting operations in the VAB, deconflicting operations in other facilities will be key, right?
It's going to be a lot of integration problems.
Challenges, yeah. We
Opportunities.
love opportunities for success. Yeah, you guys have been trained well. Good.
Well, in 1960 we were launching 200 a year,
Right.
so scheduling problems are relatively minor.
Got to have the priority, right? We're going to do it. Got to have willpower. We will do it. So. Yes, sir.
Quick question about Sierra Nevada, fully acknowledging that this is proprietary information, but I know for some time it's been reported in the paper that they're targeting a facility someplace at KSC for Dream Chaser, and we should be hearing something soon. without divulging anything, do we have any idea if soon means sometime this year, by the end of the decade?
So from the commercial crew program, you know, they're going to operate in process wherever they choose, right? So if they want to process in South Dakota, great. You meet our requirements, you can go process wherever you want.
Yeah.
Now it makes sense to process on center, near the Cape, where you're going to launch. You look at Orion, they moved manufacturing capabilities here because it makes sense to have your guy who's building the wire harnesses to be there when they don't fit,
right,
when they don't make it. So it makes sense to have your suppliers and your facilities close to the launch site. So we'll have to see how it all plays out. Yes, Laura?
Do you have a definition of man-rated?
No. So we are certifying an integrated system to go to a design and reference mission. We are designing, so you can man-rate a capsule, but when you put it onto a man-rated rocket, is the whole system man-rated? No. No. You have to certify a system. The system has to be certified for the mission and for the people. And I think to man-rate things and then put two man-rated things together, you're going to kill people. No question. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, but you still have to man-rate each piece, then put them together and man-rate the integrated part.
So the systems will have to be certified to meet their requirements, right? Your spacecraft has redundancy. Your system has, it has to meet all the requirements for that system. And then, yeah, there's the integration. But man-rating, I think folks get mixed up. You can man-rate something and then fly it for the mission that it wasn't designed for and will kill people. So that's why, from a commercial crew perspective, we are certifying a system to go to low Earth orbit and the space station. And I think a lot of folks get confused about that sometimes. And also we have performance-based requirements. So, if we say thou shalt use this standard and do this fire standard, there's different ways to make sure that the intent of that standard is met. And the companies are far more innovative and look to save every nickel they can to make sure that we meet the intent of the requirement and still make sense for their business model. Yes, ma'am.
Do you consider these companies to be commercial in the sense that they are gaining advantage with government money?
They are absolutely gaining advantage with government money. There's no question. The government is investing in them, in their capability to go fly NASA astronauts to the space station.
So are they commercial?
Because they're going to own their own designs. They're going to be able to take, for instance, if CST-100 carries NASA astronauts to the space station, they can also carry astronauts to Bob Bigelow's space station. We don't own the capsule. We're buying a service. So that's the intent. When we get a certified system to carry astronauts to our space station, the International Space Station, your space station, they can use that same design and license with the FAA to go fly other missions. So that's the intent, right? If they want to go have a laboratory on orbit for a year, they can do that. If they want to have a laboratory on orbit with a human for a week, they can do that. If they want to fly a tourist, they can do that. Whatever makes business sense for them, where they think they can get a return on their money, they can go do that. NASA needs two spacecraft, two crews to the space station safely up and back a year. That's all. And if they are able to open other markets and serve other markets, then that theoretically, if there's competition, will defray the cost. If there's not competition, well, they'll get well faster. Yes, sir.
Follow up and then my own question. Because this is something I just looked at. And the use of the word commercial, we all know Charlie Bolden and everybody else talking to Congress has said don't get hung up on that word. But that word goes back to 2004 when it first came out of the Vision for Space Exploration. It came out of the Aldrich Commission using that phrase commercial. So that word has been affixed to this program all the way back to then with this notion of offering a series of prizes similar to Centennial Challenge, only with entrepreneurs.
2005 Space Authorization Act as well.
Yeah, and the Commercial Crew and Cargo Program Office opens November 2005. So the word has been around. The word perhaps to some is misleading, but that word has been there for a long time.
I think what a lot of folks got hung up with, and if you indulge me for 1 minute, is if companies are commercial, then they'll invest their own money, get their own investors, and go do it themselves. As you all know, space is very, very expensive. And we need access to our space station. So we have basically a private partner, a public-private partnership. So we get benefit and they get benefit. And basically the American, we get a new American capability, 2, maybe 3, we'll see.
And this leads into my question, and I realize this is not part of what your office does, but as you probably know, a couple of weeks ago, it leaked out on the internet an agreement, unfunded Space Act between NASA and Bigelow, which I think, to boil it down to its essence, is that basically NASA is saying to Bigelow, go out and talk to everybody else and see if there's interest in doing I hate to use the word, commercial version of a lunar program and come back and report to us. Is that essentially the crux of it? And I know you guys don't have anything to do with that, but that would seem like it's talking about the next logical step beyond what we're doing with this.
Yeah, I didn't read that report. I don't know about that, so I can't really comment. I can tell you that that the folks have looking to see how they can plug in commercial companies, private companies that earn a profit, to see how they can leverage what we're doing with exploration.
Both Boeing and SpaceX are looking at Bigelow for a customer in the future to the space tourist hotel.
And well, Bob Bigelow wants more than space tourism, though, right? If there's, I mean, if Big Pharma will go give them a ton of money, and they can go get their space station, the whole space station, for 6 months, and they'll go run a bunch of experiments and cut down their R&D time tremendously, and go target real drugs, real treatments for sick, dying people, and make a profit. And that's the American way. And Mr. Bigelow's been waiting for a ride to space. Yes, sir.
Wouldn't it be cheaper to just pick one company right now and only pay them and get it done faster instead of spreading the money?
So that's a really good question. And if we were further along in the design, maybe. The question, though, is when you have one, look at the Russians. Reportedly, the price went up. Now, I don't know by how much, because like I said, they combined 2 contracts. But when you have one, they're going to get well faster. So all the money that they've invested, they're not sinking the cost to not make money. So somewhere down the road, they're going to make money. So if you have one, they're going to get well faster. However, if there's competition, they're going to not get well as fast. They're not going to get the return on their money quite as quickly, and they're going to look to open other markets as quickly as possible so they can get the return back. So competition really does keep the cost down, and it keeps the pressure on them to meet all NASA requirements. Now going to one, that's what we do, right? That's the normal government operations. You do cost plus, you go design it, it's a government design, you go build it to my specs and requirements, and we'll go fly it. That's fine. That's what we're doing with Orion and SLS, because it's hard. And it's got that many more nines behind it for reliability. That's what NASA does, and that's what the government does. For this, a lot of times in Air Force, you'll put performance-based requirements. I think F-22 did performance-based requirements. And for the development, they did a fly-off. They combined 4 companies, so you had 2 combined, they did a fly-off, and it was tremendously successful up until the last engineering challenges in production. And Congress got involved. So. Got help.
Well, speaking of Congress, this is an authorization year, and I don't know how many people in here know what that means, but every few years, Congress passes an authorization act for 3, 4, 5 years that basically provides a roadmap for NASA for the next few years. Doesn't guarantee the funding.
Next 2 or 3 years, right?
But it at least lays the roadmap. So that said, in the context of this being not only the annual budget cycle, but also an authorization year, is there anything you're aware of in terms of what NASA is submitting to Congress, trying to talk specifically about commercial cargo and crew for the next 2 to 3 years? Anything that's different from what we're doing?
Go read the president's budget submit. That pretty much says it all.
Okay.
And we'll see. Congressional response was what it was.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Are the Russians still using their old rockets, or did they build new ones?
So they are, they're continually upgrading. The, for instance, the Soyuz spacecraft is a TMA. So they've added, I think they've got a digital cockpit. They've also added more space for the astronauts. The astronaut requirement was you couldn't be over 6 feet tall. Now you can be 6'4". But you ever see how they cram in there? It's pretty amazing.
It's tight.
But and the Russians also are able to fly back about 100 kilograms of cargo. So they're continually upgrading, but they're very methodical. You know, you got a good design, don't fix it too fast. So but they are upgrading. All right. Well, I think it's time for coffee, and thank you again for your attention. That's a lot of rubles, and the price just went up, depending on how you look at it. So right now, the space shuttle built and completed the space station, and we only have 4 cargo carriers. We have ATV, which is European. We have HTV, which is Japanese. We have Progress, which is Russian, and they pretty much take care of their own needs. We have Dragon, now flying off a Slick 40, and they are delivering cargo. And soon we'll have Cygnus. They just completed their test flight of their rocket with a mass simulator, and if I remember right, in August, because they got to change out an engine. September maybe, I don't know, whichever news organization, but let's just say in 2013, they will fly their test mission to the space station and then begin delivering cargo. And I think they're actually going to deliver some cargo on this next test mission. For people, we have Soyuz, and that's 3. And that flies from Kazakhstan. So I want to talk a little bit about history, since I got a bunch of historians here. Where'd I go? Wait a minute. Where's mine? There it is. Okay, never mind. It's later in the slides. So the Commercial Crew Program is the next step. Laboratories. The American laboratories, half of that has been designated a national lab. And that is now managed by the CASES, which is the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space. And it's based here in Florida. The National Lab is something that was written into law, I think, in 2005. And the whole point of that is to allow researchers, academic researchers, pharmaceutical companies, even you can go write a proposal, get funded, and go fly an experiment on the space station. That's what CASES does. And so what that is that brings the demand for space science. It increases the demand so folks can make money on orbit, and therefore if you have a supply with no demand, you soon fail. We learned that in the late 90s with the EELV program. Some folks remember. So, International Space Station is the size of a football field, almost 1 million pounds, and it's an incredible engineering achievement of international relations, and the scientific achievements are just coming out. It's authorized through 2020, but it could go through 2028. And we have only one way to get there, and we pay rubles to get there. Human space flight, and that's how we're going to get to the space station. And the way we set up the program is such that we don't have requirements 6 levels deep. We have performance-based requirements and safety requirements. And we tell the companies what we need, what we want, and let them figure out how they're going to deliver it. That way they can have a business model that makes sense for them, so they can also go out and get licensed by the FAA and go serve other markets that they choose to open. For instance, Boeing is partnered with Bigelow. Bigelow has just got a Space Act agreement with NASA, and he's going to test out a module on the space station. But in the future, if you're going to go fly science in space, maybe you don't want to mess with CASES. Maybe your proposal didn't get funded. Or maybe you got your own money and you want to go fly it on Bob's station. So you go fly Bob's station if you can get investors and you want to make money doing it. So Commercial Crew started. We have 2 phases already done, and right now we're in the integrated capability phase. That's highlighted right there. So that's pretty much the public purpose, and we're moving towards certification. Actually, we have 1 contract now where we're talking about requirements, and I'll get to that later. But right now we're looking at integrated design. So CC metric ton rocket. And that's going to be evolvable to a 130 metric ton rocket. That will be breaking windows in Titusville once again. And the SLS will be launching Orion, which is a deep space capsule. So most of you are very familiar with what our capsules have done previously. Our deep space capsule has got more redundancy. It has more nines behind the reliability than what you need for low Earth orbit. So it costs more and it takes more. It also has more commodities for the astronauts because they have longer requirements to stay out in space. In addition to the radiation hardening for the electronics and the radiation shielding for the astronauts. So that's the hard stuff. Getting out to L2, getting out to an asteroid or the moon. That's exploration. Commercial crew is about getting to the International Space Station and low Earth orbit from American soil. So I always like to remind folks, we have an International Space Station which is the size, it's larger than a football field. It's almost 1 million pounds and it has 4. Again, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to talk to you a little bit about the next step in human space flight, commercial crew program. So I'd like to start off a little bit talking about Charles Lindbergh. In 1927, he flew across the Atlantic. And he did it not because there was an award or anything, he did it because he wanted to. He did it because there was a challenge. And soon thereafter, companies followed. They started transporting stuff. Soon thereafter, they started transporting people. And now we have transatlantic flights on a regular basis. So what he did sparked folks' curiosity about what they could do to build on that. So I'd like to think about that a little bit as we start with commercial crew and what we might be able to achieve from there. Right now, we have no way to get to our space station. And we have 2 phases of pretty much human spaceflight to space. One is to low Earth orbit in the space station, which is the commercial crew program. The other is the exploration program, and that is the Space Launch System, which is going to be a 70